100,000 cold cases in the United States. They won't be solved with CODIS alone.
In 1977, it's December, right around Christmas time, some guys were walking around the area of Escatawpa community of Jackson County, and they were in the area where Interstate 10 was still under construction, and it crosses over a highway called Highway 613. And at the time there was a lot of brush, wooded area, and these guys were out there hunting around Christmas, and they stumbled upon some bones. So they alerted, law enforcement. Law enforcement went out there and collected it. It wasn't a lot to go on. All they were able to really find was scattered remains of a female. They were able to tell that she had a very prominent front gold tooth. There was some evidence of her hair that remained that kind of indicated it was possible she may have worn a wig. Very, very limited amount of clothing, and something that was kind of resembled a strand of Mardi Gras beads. And that was really it. And so, at the time, 1977, we didn't have DNA, we didn't have any of that stuff. This case, they tried to work it with everything they had at the time. They couldn't link it to any missing persons. There was just really nothing to go on. There was a clay reconstruction done of the skull over the years that was kind of used as a rough comparison. But really, just like so many other cases in the 70s and 80s, just lost traction, didn't have anywhere to go with it. And so it sat. Over the years, different investigators tried to work it, and it really took a big turn around 2018 when Samuel Little started confessing to murders, and he confessed to one in our area that roughly matched the logistics for this female. And that, pointed us in the direction of who done it, but you still didn't know who she was.
Very early on, it was presumed that she was one of the many victims of Samuel Little, who's probably the most prolific serial killer of our time. And he remembered the woman, and he confessed to killing her, and he had details and so on. So I think they had solved the case early on. They knew this was a victim of Samuel Little, but Samuel Little didn't know who she was. He didn't know what her name was, and there was no leads. They couldn't figure out who she was, and so it's very sad because the case was solved, and yet they didn't know who the victim was for decades. And so when we took on the case, our goal, already knowing that she was likely to be a victim of Samuel Little, was to figure out who in fact she was.
They came on board on this previous case that we had worked involving a toddler, so they had established a relationship with our state crime lab, and during the course of that, they had basically become the folks that were on deck for working these cases when it pertains to the state crime lab. And that's who actually had the remains of Clara Birdlong. So naturally, they did the DNA work on it, and we've become fast, co-worker friends in that regard. But it was a learning process for me too, because I didn't understand how all that worked. I've had to learn a lot about genealogy and DNA, and it's a whole nother skill set that we weren't really accustomed to, but it's definitely paid for itself.
There's a presumption among the public, I think, that some of these cases that are unsolved for just reasons that involve scientific challenge or technical challenge. Maybe there's like a legal complexity, and what we've tried to show by working a lot of these cases through philanthropy and the support of the public is that, in fact, there's really one common denominator that separates the cases that are unsolved from the cases that are solved, and that's funding.
So on DNA Solves, many people come and they fund certain cases that they're interested in. We noticed that we had a specific donor that was funding many, many cases, and often. And so we reached out to this donor and asked her what motivates her and why she's adding so much funding and being so generous to certain of our cases. Her name is Carla Davis, and Carla answered by saying that she is very interested in funding every single case in the Mississippi area. She said that that is her home and that she feels very strongly about being able to solve cold cases in the past and also new cases in that area and creating a more safe and just environment in that state.
I mean, it was a matter of weeks. I got a phone call. I was at the gym one morning and Middleman called me and he said, "Hey, I've got somebody you need to check into." And I said, "Okay." And by this time, this was the second phone call he called me on. And, when somebody calls you on that, you're getting off the treadmill. You're going home and you're getting on the computer. And so that's what I did. And it was real quick. I want to say less than a month after we knew that he was working on it, I got the phone call and we tracked down a relative that was related through DNA in Texas. It was a young lady. And I reached out to her on Facebook and told her what was going on. And she had no clue what I was talking about. She's actually an actress from New York City, living in Texas, post-pandemic move that brought her over there. And she said, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I do have family. My family is originally from Mississippi. And I said, well, there's a big clue. She said, my grandmother would know. And I said, well, when did she pass? And she said, well, she's alive. She's 93 years old. And she said, I can put her on the phone. And I said, okay. And she did. And we went from there.
Tonight, we now know the identity of a woman who was known only as Escatawpa Jane Doe, tracking a trail of DNA evidence through the course of 4 decades. Investigators are now identifying the woman whose body was found in 1977 in Jackson County. Before his death last year, the nation's most prolific serial killer, Samuel Little, confessed to 92 murders, including Birdlong's. Although it took 44 years, Hoggett believes learning the identity does provide closure.
There weren't a lot of people that really remembered our victim, but for those that did, they seem very grateful that we're able to finally put a name to someone who's spent that long going unknown.
Thankfully now, we have provided an answer as who this victim was. From the very beginning of this case, we knew that it was a victim of Samuel Little, but we did not know who this woman was. And for years and years, the community wanted to know who this person was and what family she ties back into. And now she has a name and she's tied back to her family.
This whole process has empowered not only law enforcement agencies, but it's empowered anybody that has internet and a computer, because everybody can be a web sleuth now. You can get on Facebook and look at missing person flyers. You can get on Name Us. There's people that do this just out of a hobby, and they try to connect missing people and things of that nature. And on top of that, with all the genealogy websites that exist now, everybody can upload their DNA and become part of the puzzle pieces, that end up getting put together. So I am optimistic because I think this is going to keep growing as it's become more popular and you're seeing more of it on the internet, television. People are realizing, hey, I used to not think I could do anything about this because I'm not a cop, I'm not an investigator, or scientist, but you know what, everybody can, because you can get on there and donate some money to a GoFundMe or a crowdfunder and identify somebody, help identify a person or catch somebody that did something. And that's an awful lot of power for people to have. And it's another angle of community policing that we didn't even fathom probably, a couple of years ago. It's amazing.
If you want to learn more, come to DNAsolves.com, DNAsolves.com. There's cases that need funding support. You can donate your DNA to help solve the next crime, or you can share some of the stories that we've announced with law enforcement.